Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
The Office of Personnel Management is hinting at some upcoming initiatives aiming to bring more tech talent into the federal workforce. At the same time, OPM says it's looking to improve early career recruitment and focus more on applicant skill sets rather than job titles. But OPM's big hiring goals also come after hundreds of thousands of feds have left their jobs this year. Here with more, Federal News Network's Drew Friedman. Drew, great to have you.
Nice to see you, Terry.
So as we sort of set this up, we had a lot of tech talent in the government, and after DOGE's efforts and rifts and furloughs, we don't. So what do we know now about how OPM wants to solve the tech talent shortage?
There's not a whole lot of information yet on how exactly OPM is looking to tackle this challenge or what types of technology expertise they're looking to bring in. But what they did say was there are going to be some upcoming tech hiring initiatives to try to bring in more of that talent into government. As you mentioned, a lot of federal employees have left this year, so it is a little bit of a pivot or a turnaround from OPM now saying, we're actually going to start hiring more tech talent again. But the hiring initiatives that they're looking at, we don't have a clear sense of the timeline or a lot of details on what those initiatives will actually entail. But Scott Kupor did speak during a national conference for the National Academy of Public Administration recently, or NAPA, talking more about the broad goals to push agencies toward recruiting tech talents. He focused a lot on AI, artificial intelligence, and how he believes that should be really central to both hiring and incorporating into the skills or the work of federal employees currently. And here's more of what Kupor had to say on that topic.
And I think the thing that government has to do is not be the last dinosaur. If we do that, look, there's no amount of organizational structure or marketing or anything else that's going to save us. So, look, I just think we have to be willing to embrace these things. Risk-taking generally has not been a kind of strong suit of government, quite frankly. And we've got to push people to go a little bit out on the risk curve to be able to be willing to kind of adopt new technologies. If we don't, quite frankly, we're not doing any service to the American people, and we're certainly not doing any service to the employees who are in the government today.
Okay, so a tech talent hiring initiative. One of the other places where the government had programs was in early career hiring. They have pathways, they have internships, they had probationary employees, and the early Trump administration actions kind of cleared the deck of those people. Now OPM is talking about a plan for early career talent. Tell us about how they're squaring that circle.
Right. This is, again, a bit of a pivot, or a pretty large pivot, to be honest, for what the Office of Personnel Management is looking at here, trying to hire more young talent. And they've talked a lot about the statistics of the federal workforce, where it's on average older than the nationwide workforce, and very few federal employees are under age 30. So there's been this ongoing push for many years, not just this year, to hire more early career workers into federal jobs. But, with, as you mentioned, some changes over the course of the year, firing of probationary employees impacted a lot of presidential management fellows and other early career talent. For example, the PMF program was also eliminated due to a Trump executive order earlier this year. So there have been pushes in the opposite direction that may deter some early career talent from entering the government. Still, OPM Director Scott Kupor said that is going to be a major priority for OPM. He didn't give a lot of details yet on how exactly that initiative would be accomplished, but he did say he wants to try to encourage more young people to join public service. At the same time, he also discouraged this idea that individuals should be spending their entire careers in either the public sector or just the private sector. He wants there to be more flexibility for employees, for example, to join the civil service, leave the civil service over the course of a career. He explained a little bit more about his thinking behind that.
I think we need to dispel the myth that you have to kind of devote yourself at the age of 21 to a 40-year, career as a civil servant, or you have to kind of, go through the other door and devote yourself to a 40-year career in the private sector. I think one of the things we've done a really poor job on is embracing kind of people having evolving career opportunities that encompass both private sector and public sector. And so that's another area where I think OPM can help here, and we can roll out some programs, hopefully. I think we need to kind of eliminate this dichotomy that you're making a left turn or a right turn. And, the world in my mind is just not linear like that. I think the world is much more complicated, and the government needs to evolve in that respect as well.
So that's not exactly new thinking. People have been saying there needs to be more flexibility to move in and out of government to and from the private sector for a long time. How is federal hiring changing? Is it going to be hiring? We're still in a hiring freeze.
Right. So for the better part of the year, really up until just October, there was a hiring freeze for most of government. Technically, a lot of hiring is still on pause, but seems to be a bit of a pivot or turning point in that going forward with some stipulations. So President Trump issued an executive order in mid-October that essentially is going to have political appointees have a heavier hand in agencies' hiring decisions. Their agencies are being required to create these new hiring committees that are going to have to approve any new federal hire that comes into that agency. And those committees are going to be composed of senior agency leaders and other non-career federal employees. At the same time, agencies are going to be putting together staffing plans in the next couple of weeks, really, to look at what their headcount is going to be and what their goals are for the coming months or the coming year. But those staffing plans, again, have to get approval and sign off from OPM, as well as the Office of Management and Budget. So it seems like the Trump administration is loosening things a little bit in terms of hiring, but there's still going to be some pretty strict approval processes and a lot more influence from political appointees as that continues. So that's really, I think, the trend that we're going to start to see over the next several months, next couple of years, in terms of how federal hiring is going to really change for the long term.
Well, and since we don't yet have appropriations for 2026, agencies don't know what their pay budgets are going to be. So it's going to be really difficult to match those plans to budget, right?
It will be pretty complicated. It's not something I imagine agencies will be able to do in the short term, at least until they have an idea. It's possible they could potentially put together a plan based on a continuing resolution or some type of older budget. But yeah, a lot of this is definitely in flux still, and something that, agencies are potentially going to have to wait on until they really understand what the long-term picture looks like in terms of funding and headcount and what they're able to do.
So did Mr. Kupor offer any broader insight into how OPM wants to change the hiring processes overall?
So he did talk about this idea of centralizing hiring, and it's, again, another idea that we've heard many times from different OPM directors and over the course of several years to try to make the hiring process streamlined. So that can include, trying to reduce time to hire, trying to incorporate skills-based assessments rather than self-assessments, eliminating degree requirements and focusing more on federal employees or applicants' skills rather than their educational background. And then also things like pooled hiring and shared certificates, where if there's a specific type of job, for example, like a program manager, that's something common across multiple agencies, try to share lists of qualified candidates to make that hiring process a little bit faster. All of these things are ways that agencies have already been trying to change the federal hiring process for the last several years, at least. It's something that OPM, to some extent, is continuing in its merit hiring plan. So I think we're going to see potentially more guidance, more movement on that front, now that we're seeing at least a little bit of loosening again in the federal hiring freeze. This might take a while for us really to see the big picture, but it's something certainly that OPM has been talking more and more about, and that they're going to try to move forward with.
That's Federal News Network's Drew Friedman. Drew, thanks for this peek behind the OPM curtain.
Thank you, Terry.
You can find her story at federalnewsnetwork.com.
Phil McNamara, former Assistant Secretary for Administration at the Department of Transportation, emphasizes that in government, relationships matter more than titles. On this episode of Lessons in Leadership, McNamara shares how he's led large teams, navigated the future of work, and built trust across agencies. In conversation with Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA, he offers practical insights on leading with humility, empathy, and clear communication in today's complex federal landscape.
Hello, and welcome to the Lessons in Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA. Today, I'm joined by Phil McNamara, former Assistant Secretary for Administration at the Department of Transportation, and also former Assistant Secretary for Intergovernmental Affairs at the Department of Homeland Security. Welcome, Phil, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much, Shane.
You've spent time leading in multiple agencies, including both DHS, DOT. What's something you learned early in your leadership career that carried you over into future positions?
Before I dive in, let me just, for any federal employees listening to this podcast or recent former federal employees, I want to say, I see you, I value you, I thank you for your service on behalf of the American people. I wish things weren't happening the way they are happening now, but just a thank you. So you're right, Shane. I've been fortunate to serve in government twice now. If there's one thing that really kind of speaks to leadership philosophy, it's to listen first. I think back to onboarding at Homeland Security in 2009, right? I was coming from politics. I was in my mid-30s at that point. I learned you have to listen first. There's always pressure to immediately sort of make your mark. But, I think if you take the time to listen to people, whether that's career staff, whether it's, external stakeholders, build the trust, you will then be set up for sort of longer term success. And, whether it's, responding to, a crisis or just responding to, an employee concern or trying to drive, some sort of, initiative, employees, they want to be seen, they want to be heard, they want to be respected. So I think that it's that foundational lesson.
In your time in government, you've also held multiple different roles where you were managing personnel, as you've been talking, but personnel and HR policies.
Yeah.
And how did those kinds of people-driven positions affect your leadership style?
I think, if anything, the people-driven positions has made me a better communicator. There's just so much information to process that I had to be able to express what was going on to employees and leadership in a succinct and, explanatory way. And, obviously, during my time at DOT, right, the administration passed the largest infrastructure, bill in a generation, right? And a big part of that at DOT was getting that money out the door, right, quickly. But it also meant that, DOT had to, hire thousands of new employees, right? Here I was, right? I had to learn about all these hiring authorities that we could figure out a way to expedite hiring and meet the demands of what the administration wanted us to get accomplished. And I couldn't go to Secretary Pete, right, and start talking to him about the intricacies of Title V or OPM regulations for delegated hiring authorities and everything that was entailed there, in the same way that I could talk to my HR directors about that, right? So I had to find a way to, get the information to where it needed to be in the form that was most useful to the audience, right? It's sort of like, what is your audience, right? And I think that really helped me cut through what was necessary and what was sort of, fluff.
Absolutely, I agree with that completely. And was there a time when you had to make a difficult decision as a federal leader? And if you could unpack that a little bit, how did you work through that challenge?
Looking back, I think one of the hardest things we dealt with was in 2021, as we were sort of, we were all remote. We still had thousands of air traffic controllers that had to report on site. But for the most part, DOT we were doing this remotely. And so, how were we going to bring employees back to the office in a safe way? It really challenged me to think sort of more holistically, realize there's not one answer. It made me be more flexible. We had thousands of employees who now had been, working remotely for 18 months. How were we going to bring them back? And I really relied on my team to be my sounding board, to help craft the best approach possible. Where I sat, right, I had the competing demands of balancing the employee concerns with the administration's priority, right? So I think it was very challenging. Employees and people are an agency, a company, an organization's most valuable asset, right? And so, I was deeply committed to ensuring that we did this in a way that was sort of very employee-centered. That, I think, was one of the hardest challenges we solved. And, fast forward now to, 2025 with the Trump administration and just, a full-fledged 5 days a week back in the office. I don't know if anyone's really figured out the magic sauce on this, whether it's the federal government or the private sector. Everyone's still grappling with that.
Yeah. If you were to go back to the start of your career, what's one piece of advice that you would give yourself now?
The first that's really easy is just to take a long view, right? Which is that, you can get so wrapped up in whatever you're dealing with in the here and now and that day, and then just kind of take a step back and say, will any of that really matter in 5 months or 5 years? And if if it matters in 5 years, okay, yeah, invest the time and the emotional energy into it. And I think the other thing that just I would tell myself, and a constant reminder is, people will say, oh, will you meet with this, young person who's just graduating college and looking for a job, or will you meet with this intern who's down in DC for the summer? And I always say yes. No matter how busy my calendar is, I will always say yes. And what I always tell interns and folks starting out, early in their career here in DC is relationships matter more than titles. Early on, right, you're running this rat race, and you're trying to climb the ladder and get to that next rung, and chase the next cool job title. But I think what truly propels someone's career is the network of people, the colleagues, the mentors, the collaborators you build along the way, and the people you work with, right, today may become your partners down the road. So, relationships matter. Invest in those relationships. You have to show up with respect, shared values, mutual trust. But I'd say invest in relationships is just the constant reminder.
Who is one person, it can be somebody you know personally or somebody well-known, who has impacted your leadership style?
You're not going to get me to pick my favorite. But, one thing I will say I took away from my most recent boss, Secretary Pete, was just a reminder why we're doing the work we're doing, right? In particular, I think in the federal government, and it's so easy, right, to talk in either jargon, acronyms, and so I mentioned earlier the infrastructure law, and so for instance, there's a brand new grant program in the infrastructure law called the Bridge Investment Program, and it was, I think, $15 billion over 5 years to essentially repair, rehabilitate poor or at risk of being poor, failing bridges across the country. In the federal government, we can talk about it as the Bridge Investment Program and $15 billion, right? And what Secretary Pete always challenged us to do is talk about that in ways that average Americans would understand, right? And so what average Americans understand is if they have a bridge in their community and that bridge is frequently having detours or lanes of the bridge have to be sort of taken out of service and that causes delays, well, we can talk about the investment we're making and we're going to repair that bridge and it's going to be more safe and it's going to reduce delays or detours and it's going to save you time on your commute. That's far different than talking about a $15 billion bridge investment program, right? Anytime he would always challenge us just to constantly make the work we're doing matter to the American people. And so that's something that I take with me.
Well, this has been absolutely wonderful, Phil. Thank you so much for your time. And thanks to everybody for tuning in. This is Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA, reminding you to empower your team and embrace challenges. Until next time on Lessons in Leadership.
Find the full podcast and future episodes of Lessons in Leadership on the Federal News Network app and anywhere you enjoy your podcasts.